So, welcome to Pixelists or the Pixelist, perhaps the Pixelist podcast. We haven't gotten that far, but here we are. It's just two friends talking about nerdy stuff they like, shows, games, movies, anything that pixels comprise of. At least that's what we're going with.
Yeah.
I'm Will, and here with me is my illustrious co-host.
Oh, I'm Blake. I couldn't tell if you were going to be like, this is he. And, now, but the awkward pause clued me into, I am Blake and excited to be one of the Pixelists.
That's right.
That's us, right? We are the Pixelists, right?
Yeah.
Are the listeners the Pixelists?
Well, they can be them too, but we definitely are. But
Okay, yeah.
It's an open community, anyone's welcome.
We're in charge of this ship, is what I like to think. Okay,
exactly.
cool.
Exactly. And today, unless you've been living under a rock, we are going to talk about the show Loki. I feel like it's probably the biggest show that exists right now, if only because there aren't that many new ones. Or maybe there are. I don't really pay attention to stuff I don't like. Maybe there's a lot of new shows, but Loki.
Well, I mean, are we allowed to? Maybe this is like a positive only space because you mentioned like shows that no one knows about, and I forgot about that movie Mobius. Do you remember this movie?
Gosh, dude, it hasn't come out yet.
I don't even, I was like, has anyone even seen a trailer for this movie? But I want to keep it. I don't want to get like into the weeds on like knocking. It was funny to me when you were like, I mean, surely everyone knows everything that's happening, and I was like, I don't know. There's some executive out there who's like, it was his idea to greenlight this movie, and he's like, how dare you?
Gosh,
You
dude,
ruined me.
That movie just offends me. And I guess we won't go there because we're not trying to be negative.
We'll keep it positive.
But I gotta say one thing: just the whole spider enemy verse that doesn't have Spider-Man in it. Why?
Yeah, the Huntsman, right? Or the sorry, I'm going to offend the listeners who are really into the comics. See, like for me, I've never been a comic book reader. I've kind of just like discovered things as I've watched the shows and movies. And what I've come to understand is I think it's really fun for people who are like commenting on Reddit who are like, oh, well, in the comments, like here's a really cool nod to this moment in the comic, or like, for those of us who saw Avengers Endgame, we know that in the comics, Thanos actually kills Captain America.
Right.
And so they changed it, right? And so there's a little bit of this excitement around like, okay, what are they going to do? I can't think of the guy's name who oversees the entire universe.
Kevin Feige.
Kevin Feige. It's like, what's he going to do here, right? And so I think it is exciting and fun to dig into this stuff and figure it out. But on the same token, I don't know a lot about like Spider-Verse beyond what I've seen. But what I have seen is comic book lovers and those of us who are just experiencing it at the same time. It feels like all of us are kind of like, why? What's going on here?
Right? It just feels like a money grab because it's like, how are you going to do all this without a Spider-Man? But maybe they're going to get a Spider-Man, especially with what's going on in potentially Spider-Man 3 and Doctor Strange 2. But I digress. I'm not trying to. We're here to talk about Loki, which one I was just super excited about, and Blake and I haven't talked about this because we were saving it for for right now. But just quick question for you: did you like it?
I loved it. I loved it. It was everything that I was. What's really refreshing about Marvel is I consistently get excited for the next production, and that excitement, it's kind of like some movies you see a trailer and like you almost don't want to watch another trailer because you don't want to get so excited because you don't want to get let down.
Right.
But it feels like with Marvel, the production value of it, like the storytelling, the world building it's done with so much love and appreciation that I feel like no matter how excited I get, I always come out thinking, okay, yeah, that was really cool. And like with Loki, I had seen the trailer, I had seen the teaser before the trailer. And from day one, I thought this looks really, really good. And I feel like a sign of a good show is whenever my wife and I, we watch shows together, if the show's good, like we'll watch and be like, okay, we enjoyed that. But if the show's great, we instantly go back and rewind and either watch the whole episode again, or we watch different parts that we really liked about it. And that's exactly what we did with Loki. Was we were rewinding, we were watching certain scenes. So we loved it. What about you?
I could just steal your whole speech there, I pretty much would. Like I loved it as well. And this of the Marvel shows that are like that we the world knows about, this and WandaVision were the ones I was looking forward to most. And WandaVision surpassed my expectations. So this is almost a hindsight thing saying that I was really excited for WandaVision. I was, but just taken up to the next level with how well it like delivered. But
Mhm.
Loki just and I love Falcon and the Winter Soldier, nothing against it. Um but Loki I was just super excited for because that character is so interesting. You know, the God of Mischief and just the Pandora's box that the show seemed to be opening, which we can kind of talk about that a little bit later, but just the fact that we were getting like more time travel, reality
Mhm.
jumping and all that stuff, I was just super excited for like the possibilities that this was gonna allow the MCU to explore. Um, but
Isn't
yeah,
it interesting how all of these things that you just said, time travel, cross dimensional, or what the Falcon said in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, it's always the big three, uh,
oh yeah,
which was like androids, aliens,
and
and
wizards.
wizards. Yeah. This stuff it's when you think about it, it's fantasy mixed with really sci-fi. And yet, whenever you watch the show, it doesn't really feel like it's a bit challenging to almost like bucket into that thing. It's like if you were describing Loki even after episode 1 to someone who's never heard of it, I feel like I wouldn't be like, "Oh, it's a sci-fi show."
Yeah,
But there's so much sci-fi elements to it, and I think that just speaks to the production of the show and how good they are at making content that people feel they can easily consume. And I don't necessarily mean like the access to it. I mean like the relatability of it. There's
yes,
this kind of this running stereotype of like Marvel humor that has made the content very relatable. And you even see like other movies get criticized for trying to recreate Marvel humor.
yeah,
But it's very digestible. And I think with Loki, something it's probably the farthest they've pushed the franchise or the Marvel universe, and yet it still feels very it's like, yeah, I'm following with what's happening here.
very grounded, even though it's
Right.
taking place in these crazy sandboxes.
Right.
Which, yeah, I think that's why Marvel succeeded, right? Is because they do all these fun things and these big spectacles, but at the core of it, it's always like characters that like are really relatable and grounded and just
Well, let's think about this. Thor, bumming out while his roommates play Fortnite. I mean, that was such a like, and it's at the peak of Fortnite. It's such a relatable moment, and so I think you're totally right. They take these characters that, even though nothing on paper should line you up with, okay, I feel a sense of connection with this character. You're still like, okay, yeah, that's so funny. I get that. I
yeah,
understand that. So,
it's they're good at what they do, and I just like that, you know, with all the success and stuff they've had, the money they just literally print, that they are continuing to like take these risks with something as zany as Loki or as just straight up crazy as WandaVision. Like, I love it. And I can't wait to see like what unfolds over the course of these next 6 episodes. I don't know if it's 6 or 8.
I feel like it's 6, but I actually have no idea.
Okay.
It's one of those moments where you say something very confidently, and the person's like, "Yeah, that makes sense," because you're very confident about it. So yeah, we have, and the episode was, I think the runtime was 53 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's long content, which is really fun. Um, do you want to dig in and talk about the episode?
Yeah, let's do it. I guess just before I jump into a quick recap of the ep, just going to give a quick overview of what the show is for people that may be listening and don't know anything about Marvel or, need help. Essentially this show and this is all just what we know so far. I'm obviously not spoiling anything. Loki is, god of mischief from Asgard, brother to Thor, son of Odin, adopted. And at the end of Avenger, or not the end, but in Avengers, the time heist in Endgame, they were going back to get the stones, and when they were going to get the Tesseract, aka the Space Stone, they ran into a little kerfuffle, and this version of Loki that we are following in the show gets it and disappears. And that didn't happen in the original sacred timeline, as it were. So because of that, he's a branch Loki. He's a different Loki. It caused a different reality branch, and we are now witnessing what this adventure is. So this Loki is not the one that we've come to know and love over the past 7 years of Marvel. That one's dead, unfortunately. But and we'll dive more into the specifics of that in a bit. But this show is just following him, and after he gets abducted by the Time Variance Authority, who are the basically time cops of Marvel. So because he kind of broke the timeline and created this new branch reality, they captured him, and that's basically where the show picks up. Did I miss anything glaring there as far as a?
I'm just amazed at how well you just explained like multiverse and
Oh well, we're
in like
just getting
2 minutes.
started.
I mean, because like, and it's funny. Here's another, and I don't mean to like keep harping on this, but going back to like again how like digestible this stuff is. Like, my wife does not like, kind of like multiverse and like branches of time. These are things that have been in media and games for forever. And so if you have, immerse yourself in this kind of content, this kind of thing happens, you're like, okay, I get what's happening here. But someone like my wife, who she's not super into any of that stuff, like even she was getting it and was like, okay, yeah, so this is this Loki, not the one we saw in Endgame.
Right.
So, but yeah, I think you did a great job explaining it, and I think Marvel did a great job in delivering this first episode, where it was like, okay, yeah, I'm understanding. I mean, they're sort of setting the stage, and Owen Wilson's sort of taking this role of explaining who you are and how, like, exactly what's happening here. But at the same time, he's sort of serving as this narrator that's explaining to the audience,
Yeah.
this is really what's happening here. And I
Right.
think I think they did a good job of that.
I agree. It did. I'm the type of person that like thinks too much into stuff and like, well, what does this mean? What does that mean? And so it definitely gave me a lot of questions that I'll probably bring up to you in a minute, but they did a great job of just like explaining the ground rules of like what's happening, which I enjoyed, especially after they kind of in Endgame they kind of contradicted their own time travel rules a little bit. So this kind of fixed that, and again, I can touch on that in a little bit, but as far as Ep 1, I'll give a quick recap of that now. It it opened with Loki escaping via the Tesseract, like I just said, during the in-game Avengers time heist. Uh, he gets out of there only to, but almost immediately, at least as we're presented, get captured by the TVA, who, hits them with their time travel little slowdown device, which was really cool. And then, they take him in and start processing him through like the bureaucracy that is the Time Variance Authority. Seems very retro, very old school, and just Loki and us as the viewer is being presented with like what this place is, what's going on. We kind of get a quick explanation of everything via a really cool cartoon that we could talk about in a little bit. So that happens. Loki's getting tried for his crimes against the sacred timeline, and before he's about to be sentenced, Owen Wilson's character Mobius M. Mobius is like, "Wait, I can maybe use him because he seems to be investigating a murder
Mhm.
or something that we've seen earlier." So he grabs Loki, goes and takes him to the projector room, shows him his whole life in the future that he has yet to live, but from the
Mhm.
original timeline. So Loki, and I kind of enjoyed this because they like are basically giving our Loki, which I'm gonna just call the one from the show our Loki to not be confusing. They're basically giving our Loki all the character development that he has never
Right.
had, but that we're familiar with. So I kind of liked
And I,
that.
I like that because I was thinking, how are they going to? Because the Loki we got in Endgame was, I'm speaking for myself, but huge fan favorite of mine. I mean, I really liked the character, how he developed in Thor Ragnarok. I mean, I was a huge Loki fan,
Yeah.
and I was wondering, okay, you're taking villain Loki at the end of Avengers, who hasn't been, and I don't know if we'd ever say he was like fully redeemed, but definitely progressed. His character became more noble and more, I guess, heroic is what you could say.
Right.
Less villainous is maybe the right way to put it. So you take the villain version who just invaded New York City, and now we as the viewer are supposed to essentially root for him. He's the
Right.
hero or maybe the anti-hero of the show. So I agree. I think they did a great job of sort of mending that gap a bit,
Yeah.
it was, the death of his. Oh, I don't want to get into it. Actually, I don't want to spoil anything yet. I don't want to get too far ahead of where you want to go with the description of the conversation. But Mobius sort of in showing him his life's the future that he hasn't yet lived. He sort of has this character moment in a very, short-term way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I'm glad they did that because specifically those moments they showed him were like huge moments for his character, right? So like I don't know if it's like I love that they did it and I'm glad it happened, but part of me is like, is this kind of like a cheap way to get us to like endear to this Loki that hasn't actually done any of that? But I mean, I guess technically it's the same person, right? But
part of me wonders if, like with WandaVision, it was so well crafted that every piece of development felt very intentional, and it felt like they were going to address each loose end in some way. I think what I saw more in Falcon and the Winter Soldier is that these are limited series shows, and unfortunately, they have to rely on, I wouldn't call it a gimmick, but on some gimmicks to advance the story for the sake of the series. And so
yeah,
it would be cool if this was sort of some kind of, we see a glimpse of what Loki could, him restoring to how we see him in the latest Marvel films. It'd be cool if it was a glimpse of that, but yet he's still the old Loki.
yeah,
I anticipate that they've used that as sort of a band-aid quick fix where now he's the hero we can root for because he had, these 8 minutes of runtime in front of the projector. So, and for better or worse, I mean, they delivered on it it was well executed, but
yeah,
I'm not expecting any kind of trickery, I guess, around it.
yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see kind of like how he develops from here. Like, will he still reach that same place he was at when he sacrificed himself for his brother, or like, is he going to take a whole new direction? Like,
Right. Right.
um, but okay, so yeah, but so he gets the time projector and sees his future. But then quickly after that, he manages to steal the little device and escape for a bit and kind of, trying to see how he can get out of here, whatever. And that's when he finds a pretty funny scene, by the way, with the Casey is the name of the TVA like desk guy that has the drawer full of Infinity Stones. And once Loki sees that and he sees that these are all basically just inert pieces of rock that don't do anything, he kind of realizes that, okay, maybe this is real. Maybe I'm in over my head. Like, what's going on here? And then, he kind of returns with his tail between his legs a little bit, um, and talks to Mobius, who then reveals that the murderous variant that he has been chasing is another version of Loki. So he kind of offers up this olive branch to our version of Loki, saying like, help us if you really don't enjoy hurting people, because Loki just had a moment of like vulnerability after watching his future and stuff, and says, I don't like hurting people. It's just a wall I put up. And so Mobius is like, well, then help us, take down this other version of you. And that's basically how the episode ends, except we do get a quick clip of a hooded figure who is presumably this murderous Loki, burning down a whole bunch of TVA operatives who had gone out to search for him. And he actually steals their little reality detonation grenade, which I wanted to ask you
It's
about.
like the resetter thingy.
Yeah. So
So
that's the ep. Now, I just wanted to give a quick recap so people were on the same page with us. Although I don't know why you'd be watching this if you didn't watch the ep, but there we go. Um, and yeah, now I guess we could just launch into a million different things. But while we're right here on the subject, what did you think about the little grenade things, which they at the very beginning of the show when they first apprehend Loki and they're taking him away, one of them places it and it's like, we're going to prune this timeline, and it like lights up and then, presumably explodes or something. But to me, the implication was that like that literally just destroyed that entire universe. Is that what you were getting from it?
I
Or
had the same perception from the the Miss, I think it was Miss Minute, Miss Minute's
yeah, Miss Minutes,
commercial,
yeah.
or I say commercial, her infomercial thingy, because the graphic that shows is it has like the sacred timeline and then the off branch, and then they show the actual like little vial getting placed and then the branch
Mm.
disappearing.
Okay, right.
And so to me, I agree with you. It does seem like this is something that literally obliterates that timeline.
Which is intense, right? Because in a way, that's like massive genocide, like
Well, I
trillions
guess
of.
and there here's something that's interesting to think about is I'm really curious to see where they take the role of the TVA in terms of, because like Marvel, they really love like the established authority figure being either full on evil or of questionable decision making. So some
Mhm.
examples I think of this is Captain America and the Winter Soldier. You find out that Sword is actually Hydra.
Right.
We see the
Shield,
same
but yeah.
thing. Oh yeah, sorry, Shield. Sword's the new one, right?
Right.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're good.
Um, so Shield, we see in WandaVision that now Sword, its acting director is obviously,
A D
not
bag.
not a good dude. I mean, dude tries to kill a kid. So we usually rank that as not good.
Yeah, not great.
And so it just seems like they like to take figures that like, hey, this is they're the established good guys, and then they kind of turn that on its head. And so
Mhm.
I like that you point out that this whole reset thing is interesting, and it's what made Thanos, I think, such like a great character. Is in some ways it's the same concept. He's making decisions that are hurtful to large groups of people for the betterment of the entire universe. And it seems like the TVA is doing something similar, where they
Yeah.
are, I guess, because and for the viewers, as you probably saw, at one point there were all these different timelines that were battling against one another, and it's very vague as to what that really means. But
Right.
they established the sacred timeline, the main timeline, so that I guess to reduce the overall death and destruction and what have you. And so it does seem like this very negative outcome for people who are unfortunately part of these branch timelines. The thing I want to ask you, and I don't want to like bounce around too much, but this whole concept of like resetting and not resetting and like who exactly the TVA is and like are they really the good guys or not?
Yeah.
I want to ask you, what do you think about the line? Because I think everyone was thinking this. The line where Loki sort of speaks for the audience and says, well, it seems like the Avengers are actually
Right.
the ones who are abusing the sacred timeline. I mean, they went
Yeah.
back in time and, and
Changed
Loki's
everything.
obviously, he's, I guess the opt out of how he could know this is, you can smell the cologne of two Tony Starks.
Yeah.
But so, and then the judge responds, well, that was supposed to happen,
Right.
which was an interesting comment. But I'm also thinking about Captain America going back in time to return the stones
Right.
and then living his life in another timeline. Why
Right.
didn't that timeline? Why was that timeline allowed to exist? Like these are things that I think about that don't quite make sense to me, and it makes me wonder, like, what's the level of discrimination that happens when it comes to? It doesn't seem like every branching timeline actually gets reset, but that they, I guess, make a decision on a case by case basis. I'm not sure.
Well, and my thoughts on it were that those events happening were like that was supposed to happen. Like I don't think those created branches. I think they're trying to say that like that is the sacred timeline that those things happened. Like, the Avengers always go back in time to do that. And so like we're not going to change that because that's what has to happen type of thing. Which is that a satisfying answer? Because like yeah, like why how come Steve was allowed to go live a completely different life, which that doesn't even make sense unless they're trying to say that that was always what happened, which there isn't evidence for that. And then like why is Thanos and his entire army allowed to like come from the past to the future and have that big battle at the end of Endgame? There's a lot of things that don't make sense, but I mean their blanket answer of just like, oh, we like that was supposed to happen. We wanted that to happen. Whereas, you Loki doing this, that's not part of the sacred timeline, so it must be cleaved.
You
Which
know,
go ahead.
well, I was going to say one of the things that I think Mobius mentions is the purpose of Loki when he's talking about Loki's life. It's essentially says you exist to bring out the best out of other people.
Yeah.
And it shows sort of like the spinning image of all of the Avengers.
Right. Yeah.
And so part of me wonders this conversation of like timelines and like which ones are allowed to sort of um I, I can't think of the right word. It's like
Exist.
not just exist, but it seems like what is being implied is that some timelines actually are pairs to the sacred timeline in assisting and promoting the sacred timeline. So like, the timeline where they go back and steal the stones, well, it was supposed to happen because that then equips the sacred timeline with the resources they need to defeat Thanos.
Right.
And maybe Thanos being allowed to bring his army over to that timeline in a roundabout way, just like Loki existing. Mobius says you are basically evil and you've always been evil, and you are evil sort of on purpose because your evil nature brings out this betterment of the heroes of Marvel. It's kind of hard to conceptually like get your hands on a little bit, but it does make you wonder if there is something happening behind the scenes where it's not just like this blatant, oh, that's a branching timeline, let's go ahead and reset it. But there seems like there is a little bit of an intentionality of what gets allowed to let our universe, the main universe Marvel heroes, to allow them to continue to exist and become stronger. And I don't know if they're setting up like a future big bad evil, or if it's just something that it's going to be a loophole that never gets addressed. I don't know. It's kind of hard to think about.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we obviously get into crazy territory when time travel's involved and now multiverse, so it gets weird. And it's one of those things that, like, I'm not saying the things you just brought up don't have an answer. They maybe do, but there's just always going to be some sort of plot hole when you're talking about time travel and all that kind of stuff, I feel like. So I feel like it's got to be taken with a little bit of grain of salt. But what was I gonna say? Oh yeah, the him telling Loki that like you exist to like improve these other people or whatever it was. Well, it's kind of a fucked up thing to say, that like your only purpose is to like make these other people look good, or like be
It's a
better.
it's a very like I don't want to make it like it's very much like, I don't know, it's hard to wrap your head around, because you're like, it sort of implies this sort of very intentional design of every character, and like, okay, these characters are designed to be the heroes, and here are their foils that are designed to make them better and stronger. And so it brings into question like these concepts of like free will, and
Yeah,
this is very heavy stuff. And it's heavier stuff than I feel like Marvel has gone into before. And so it almost makes me think that these things won't be addressed, because it is heavier content. But the implications of it are pretty interesting, because if a character is designed to be evil, so to speak, for the betterment of someone else, then that means that the deaths of the people that Loki directly impact,
right.
those people were sort of maybe not necessarily destined to die, but it was an acceptable loss in
Greater
the
good.
journey, yeah, that they created for the greater good. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and especially the free will stuff. I think Loki even said it. I don't remember the exact word, but he was like getting explained this, and he was like, "Everything I've done has been because I wanted to," or something like that. And it is a great point, because like if that's what we're getting, then is there free will? Like and if there's not, then nothing's interesting, right? So I think they will maybe not fully address that, but I think we'll kind of get more into it. I think Loki's going to be the kind of, even though he's helping them right now, kind of like antagonistic toward the TVA, and maybe potentially root out some corruption if there's maybe some weird stuff going on. Like, because who decides which timeline is sacred? Like, who are they to
Right.
decide when this happens, that's what's supposed to happen? And maybe the branch timeline would be better, but who's
Let me ask you, who do you think the TVA bosses basically? And I can't remember what they called them, but it's basically the three.
oh yeah.
The imagery of them is literally all over the place. And even in my wife called them lizard people,
Yeah.
because in the Miss Minutes infomercial, you see them and they are, there's some like person who like has a podcast on like globalism who's like, see, they are lizard people, or they're this was their moment
Marvel's
to finally
trying
have
to
it.
tell us the truth.
Yeah, but they didn't give any explanation. It was just like, there was total chaos. All the timelines were fighting against one another. And then these three people show up and say, hey, this is the sacred timeline. And that's all we get. That's all we're told. So like, what, in your mind, who are these people?
Yeah, okay, I'm glad you brought that up because I meant to give an explanation of the TVA before we started, so I forgot. And so I actually wrote down this one sentence, which is how when the cartoon part starts and we're getting the narration of kind of what happened, it goes, long ago there was a vast multiversal war, but then the all-knowing timekeepers emerged, bringing peace by reorganizing the multiverse into a single timeline, the sacred timeline. So as it's presented to us, there used to be all different timelines, realities, and there was a big war, which that opens a lot of questions. It makes me even think about certain comic things that happened that maybe that's what that was. And, maybe we're just experiencing the timeline through the Avengers that we've been following, but maybe like all sorts of crazy stuff has happened at other times. Anyway, don't want to digress too much. But so these three lizard timekeepers guys emerge.
Like we're calling them the lizard timekeepers.
And then they bring peace by reorganizing. So one, they merge from where, from what, from who? How do they reorganize the multiverse? That seems like an insane amount of power. And then again, which we just brought this up, like why this timeline? Like why is it sacred? So that's all we're given here. I imagine we'll probably dive more into that, especially like kind of like I was saying, if there is some sort of like corruption or shadiness or just like something else going on, perhaps Loki dives into that and like finds out, oh, like this is all propaganda, which there is a lot of propaganda throughout the TVA. Like there's all those like old school posters that say like it said like someone's always watching or something like that. And
very Big Brother-esque.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like they're not 100% on the up and up. Like there's something there somewhere, I feel like, and hopefully we get shown that. But I will say that in the comics, the timekeepers were created by a character known as the One That Remains, who was like the last ever TVA agent. And apparently, like when the universal time like resets, like the universe disappears and starts over again, or whatever you want to call it, he somehow survived and remained through that transition and created the timekeepers and was like, all right, we are the TVA, we're always here, now get this going again for this new universe. And so that's the explanation there. We didn't really get any of that here. So Marvel strays a lot from the comics. They usually do different things, but it's just an interesting way to think about it, that like here it says they emerge, in the comics they were created. Might be leaning too much into just syntax there, but I don't know.
I read a Reddit comment of, and that's part of the fun of watching these shows on a weekly basis, is diving into Reddit and seeing people's theories. And, it's kind of become a running joke now of now every Reddit comment is, but where's Mephisto? Because every WandaVision episode was like, they're setting up Mephisto.
He's coming.
And so like now people kind of jokingly, like totally unrelated things like, I loved Falcon's new suit. Yeah, but where's Mephisto? It's like just things like that. But so, people, they like to get into their fanfare a bit and, get a little bit away from what's actually happening. But I did appreciate one comment I read today, which was someone was basically wondering out loud of, we don't really know yet who the big bad is going to be of this next chunk of Marvel. And, obviously we just had the end of Thanos, and there were different cuts and scenes of Thanos through all the films that really was setting him up as the big bad evil guy. We haven't quite seen that yet. All we've seen really is people's own theories on Doctor Doom, or I can't think of someone else. It's a really common one that gets mentioned a lot. But basically, yes. What's his name?
Kang the Conqueror.
Yes, Kang the Conqueror. That's right. Who is this time traveling individual as well? And so there's all these different theories, all these different thoughts. And one of the comments I read was someone saying it seemed like they were setting up the TVA and our lizard timekeepers as the big bad evil guys. Almost implying that the reason they love the sacred timeline so much, or that they protect it so much, is that maybe at some point it will be at a certain point that the timeline gets to, something will happen that will be of service to them or will be sort of their end goal. Obviously, this is some random person's like total guess and conjecture, but it is interesting to wonder who will be the big bad evil guy, and could the TVA play a role in that?
Yeah, agreed. And like, I definitely think that if it is something like that, self-serving, like I feel like that makes sense because why would they just be benevolent? You know what I'm saying? Like, I definitely feel like something's going on, and maybe the timekeepers aren't even real. Maybe that's just been like mythology created to, you know, subdue people and get the people in the TVA to do this bidding. Because I mean, like I said, there already is a lot of propaganda, so why not this creation myth of how the TVA started be part of it?
And if you read between the lines, there is a very much Wizard of Oz esque
Mm-hmm.
who is the man behind the curtain. Where Loki's like,
100%.
can I talk to the timekeepers?
Yeah.
And the judge is like, oh well, they're very busy. And so that feels a bit too on the nose to me for there not to be some kind of big reveal or some realization that it's not literally these three benevolent godlike characters who are orchestrating events for the benefit of all mankind. Or I don't know, it seems like we're already from episode 1 being set up for some kind of reveal like that.
Yeah, I agree. And not to, I mean, I'm the guy sitting here talking about the corruption. I'm trying not to say that again, but if there is something like that, do you think that Mobius is like, is he actually a legitimate like guy trying to do what's right, or do you think he's maybe part of the corruption or whatever it may be? Like,
I think they've written him as too likable a character to make him part of the corruption. I mean, now we're acting like it's fact. It's going to happen.
This is
But
our Mephisto.
they've made him too likable. I think that,
Mm.
I mean, unless they're going for like the ultimate like rug out from under you, like what they, and I will say every time Owen Wilson gets on screen, like his like nose, like the little divot gets deeper and deeper. But he's such a likable character.
Yeah, he
The
is.
internet loves Owen Wilson too,
They
with
do.
like the wow memes, and I have a hard time believing that they would ever have him legitimately be bad. And I actually can't think of a movie where he's actually played an evil character.
Yeah.
Which I don't know. I mean, maybe we need to check into his filmology, but I think that he is an unwitting contributor to whatever nefarious purposes that the TVA has. I don't know. What do you think?
I'm on board with you as far as that. Like, I don't think he's evil, but yeah, I think that he. This is gonna become a meme, but if there is corruption and that is going on, like he's gonna be the type of guy that like maybe will like go outside the rules, like with Loki in order to try to like right the ship type of thing. At least that's what I hope. Like I hope he's not evil, like because I like Owen Wilson. I mean, not that if you're evil, it can't still be a likable character, but
Well, we
yeah,
can see that. I think you're right. I mean, we can see that in the show even where he takes this Loki to, and we don't know this at the time, but he's basically trying to get a better understanding of Loki to catch the other Loki,
right,
and everyone around him is like, "This is a bad idea. Like, you shouldn't do this."
yeah.
So I think you're right.
They just straight up murder people and erase them from existence at a moment's notice.
What do you think about that? Like the guy who, because I'm thinking about this, like how casual this whole moment plays out, where they're in the ticket line, and the
Yeah,
guard says, "Take a ticket," and the guy says, "No, I'm not going to." And the guard doesn't say anything. He's just like, "Okay." And then he gets like disintegrated,
yeah,
like 4 minutes later. It- and here I am in hindsight thinking like, man, they really, actually what it implies to me is that no one is truly innocent if they're there at the TVA. The way I saw it was,
it's probably
when she's
fair.
like, "How do you plea? I sentence you to yada yada." The sense that I got was that probably everyone gets reset, which I'm assuming
Yeah,
reset means you get poked with the baton, or and so if everyone gets reset anyway, then no one's going to necessarily cry if this guy who just is saying I don't have a ticket just suddenly gets like lasered, and now he's. I mean, it's like no one
true.
bats an eye, no one says anything. There's not like, "Oh, you can't do that. That's really kind of frowned upon here."
Yeah,
It's just like business as usual, right? And so I kind of wonder if everyone, if that's just there's sort of like this fake proceeding where really everyone gets reset anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that. They clearly don't place much value on one individual because, I mean, especially if I think Loki is L1130, which I don't know what that means, but presumably it means like he's the 1130th variant of Wednesday or whatever it may be. So there's clearly like tons and tons, if not millions of iterations, right? So to them, it's like, well, we're just going to delete this one. What does that change? Like kind of like, well, I won't be too spoilery here, but in Invincible, how Omni-Man views people, it's like,
Yeah.
they're nothing to us, type of thing.
Right.
And I
But
do
isn't
think.
it?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that I don't know this. This is just pure speculation, but based on the way the weapon worked at the beginning, when she punched him and he's like, and like slow down time. That's clearly an insane Pandora's box right there that you can like do stuff with time, and the little collars that like, which remind me to talk about the collars again because I don't want to get too far off track here, but you were saying maybe they just ultimately like delete everybody, but they do have some cool possibilities with like time manipulation, which also seemingly the TVA exists outside of time, or at least outside of time as we understand it in the MCU, because they're just traveling to and fro everywhere. And Mobius even says like time works differently here or something like that. So like they exist outside of time and they have, the technology to manipulate slow time. What if they just like torture people in like a void of null time for like eternity, like maybe like 2 seconds in real time, but it's thousands of years like to them. Like, did you see that episode of Black Mirror that was kind of like this?
Nah. I saw one episode of Black Mirror and then thought I probably won't watch this again.
Was it the first episode?
It was the pig.
Yeah, you can't start with the first episode. It's too strong.
By the way, I don't know if you know this, they reorganized that season where now that episode is like halfway through or something.
Good. I mean, that's a lot. I had that warning before I watched it. They were like, if you're gonna watch it, just don't start with Ep 1. And I was like, I'm starting with Ep 1.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen all of it, but there are some really good eps. But anyway,
there's an episode, I guess, where someone gets tortured through time, or what do you mean?
Yeah, so there's like, I mean, the show's all about like these dystopian like technology things and like all sorts of craziness. But this one specific episode was about like they basically had the technology to do what I just described. Like when like somebody got arrested or whatever, you could like send their consciousness into this prison, and then you could like set a dial for like 10 years, 20 years, 9 million years. And like to them, it would just be like, just like a void hell for that entire time. And
Jeez.
so, that's probably not related to this at all. But because I had that swirling in my mind and seeing the stuff they did in this show, I was like, I wonder if they do, some weird stuff like that with their time control.
Well, it does make you wonder, like this evil Loki, referring to the Loki they're trying to catch. When they catch him, does he just get zapped, or does he go to some kind of prison? Or
yeah,
it's interesting to think about that as well. Like, what are the implications of what they do with this Loki? And speaking of that Loki, we see the hero Loki, our Loki. We see the moment that he gets created, so to speak. Like his birth is this moment where the Tesseract slides across the floor and he picks it up, and variant Loki 1130 is made.
Yeah.
Where do you think the other one came from? Have you done any like guessing or conjecturing in your own mind, or
I was going to ask you
sort
the
of his
same
backstory?
thing, because like obviously there was some other event that was a Nexus event, as they are called in the show, which Nexus events are events that something different happens and it causes lots of different branches to come off. So yeah, I was wondering that, like, what happened to create this one? Like, it could even be our Loki, like in the future even. Like, I don't know if they would do that and just, make him go a full-on heel turn of being evil. Or maybe like he has motivations that we would then understand later to be like, I mean, not that you're ever gonna root for him to be like killing members of the TVA, but I don't know. I really don't have any good guesses as far as like if there have been any clues thus far in the MCU of like some event that maybe branched off or anything. But I mean, it is super interesting, and I hope we get to see it because I want to know like what caused this. You know?
Do you feel like they revealed that the big, maybe I'm jumping ahead here, but the supposed big bad of this series is Loki? Do you feel like they revealed it too quickly, or do you feel like it was good to get it out of the way in the first episode?
That's interesting because not to toot my own horn because it was very obvious. Like it's pretty obvious, but I was like, oh, I bet the bad guy's Loki, and that's why they're getting him so that they can get like help from Loki to catch Loki. So I was already thinking that. So the fact that they revealed it, I was like, oh, okay. So this wasn't going to be like a big mystery they toyed with. So in that regard, I think it's fine that they got out early, but just for like wanting to like have guessed it, I'm sad that it wasn't like 4 episodes later and I could have been like, yes, I knew it. But
Yeah, right.
I also think that he's won't really be the big bad. Like I think
It,
there will be some sort of turn where not that Loki's not evil and like needs to be dealt with, but just that there will be some other true like antagonist or thing that needs to be dealt with, be it the TVA or I don't know.
or maybe he is the big bad, but it's kind of like the other shows they've done so far where there is a very clear enemy that is being set up for a future film. I don't know,
Yeah,
for example, we know the name of the next Doctor Strange movie, which is the Multiverse of Madness. So it's implied that this whole sacred timeline, it doesn't stay so neat and tidy,
right,
by the time Doctor Strange gets involved. And so we know that some things get complicated, things get really messy. And so I wouldn't be surprised if whether Loki's the big bad evil person, and obviously I play a lot of D&D, and so I keep referring to what they call their big bad in their campaigns.
yeah,
But whether Loki ends up being the big bad evil or not, I do think there will be a what's next, so to speak, in terms of okay, what's going to happen with this.
right.
So it does seem like, I don't know if your take on this. It does seem like this Loki is familiar with the TVA.
The
Like
one,
obviously the
the bad one.
the bad one, because we know that in the French chapel, the soldier basically says, hey, yeah, the resetter is missing. And then we see in the final scene him actually pick it up and take it.
Yeah,
So he's collecting them for some
right,
reason. And so he clearly understands what they are and what they're for. And it almost sort of makes me wonder if that Loki had also been recruited in some way, maybe not similar way that the Loki we're watching did,
right.
but if he hasn't also been into the TVA at some point, and whether he escaped or was let loose or who knows, it does make me wonder um, if there's something that has happened with this Loki that we're not aware of or that Mobius isn't letting us in on.
Yeah, I 100% agree because, not only those things, but he seemingly set a trap for them at the end there, I presume. And then, you kind of have to understand what's going on to be able to set that type of trap. But then I don't really remember the terminology because it was so new and we're not really supposed to yet. But clearly, like that pack of gum that they were analyzing, and he was like, check it for time signatures or whatever. And he's like, there's not going to be any, like implying that like he's too crafty and too smart and wouldn't have like left the trail in that way. So like if that is the case, then he clearly has an understanding of like what's going on here. So yeah, I agree. Like he definitely is familiar with it, if not expertly familiar with it. Like, I mean the possibilities are literally infinite with the infinite multiverse, but perhaps he's like had decades of experience with the TVA.
Do you think that he's maybe collecting all, or I'm thinking this as I'm saying it. I wonder if he's collecting all of the resetter vials because he wants to make like a really big resetter. I don't know. I mean, that's
Yeah,
like maybe he wants to start everything from scratch and just like burn it all down. I don't know.
it's
I'm not sure where he wants to go with this.
it's super interesting because like from what we've seen, it just requires one to delete an entire universe, right? So like why do you even need multiple unless he's like maybe to like destroy the TVA itself if its rules are a little bit different, like maybe you would need a bigger explosion, or maybe there's like maybe he's got like a mastermind of like timeline plans and he like wants to eviscerate certain ones
Mhm.
Maybe he's trying to destroy the sacred timeline or
Yeah.
something. I don't know. But it is on your point a second ago that like we know Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness is coming. Like clearly that's kind of we learned about this the whole thing started because there was a multiversal war. And so maybe that's kind of the direction we're headed and maybe through this show the sacred timeline or Loki or whatever kind of gets destroyed or disrupted and thus boom. Plus, we got Scarlet Witch out there trying to find her kids, probably toying in the multiverse. Um, like I just imagine that shit does hit the fan, and that's kind of what
Mhm.
Doctor Strange 2 is about. But what's interesting is Michael Waldron, who is the showrunner for Loki, um, also wrote Doctor Strange 2. So like the person that's heading this ship
Wow.
is like knows what's going on, you know what I mean? So like I bet there will be, if not like a direct through line, definitely like clues
And
and bits and stuff.
didn't and again, I'm grabbing here. I feel like in the comics, Loki and the Scarlet Witch are a bit of a pair in that I think maybe there's even like certain series that are focused on the two of them together or something like that. And so it kind of makes me wonder if this is sort of like the next big picture development. We had WandaVision end where she has the I can't think of what the book's called. I keep thinking of it as like the Necronomicon
Yeah, yeah. The
from
Darkhold.
yeah, the Darkhold, right? We see her, she's like reading into this and learning, and you're kind of like, oh, and that's the setup for Multiverse of Madness. And
Right.
I'm sure it plays a part. Obviously, it does, but it does make me wonder, since they were a bit of a pair in the comics sometimes, if this is the next big development towards that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I I imagine or at least hope that Loki also we know that Scarlet Witch is confirmed to be in Doctor Strange 2. I hope we see Loki too. And I mean, if the direction of this show that we think is happening is any indication, it almost wouldn't make sense if he didn't show up, you know?
Mhm. Well,
But
let me ask you. I got another just random question for you.
yeah.
Are the people at the TVA, are they human?
Yeah, okay, I had
Because
that exact same question.
we see from Guardians of the Galaxy that there's this very diverse universe, so many different. It was almost like kind of Star Wars esque of,
Right.
one of the first movies where you see all these different races, and we see this in Guardians of the Galaxy, like all these different alien creatures, and even like the detective duck or whatever his name is,
Oh yeah, Howard the Duck.
yeah, Howard the Duck. And so I'm telling you, anyone who's like a comic book reader is like, who is this guy who's your co-host? Because he doesn't know any of the terminology. Um, but so it's interesting to me that this place that's sort of tasked with guarding the universe, like the sacred timeline, the greater universe as a whole, is run by a bunch of humans. I don't know. I'm a little thrown by that, and
I
I
agree.
wonder. I have all these questions. Like, it looks like they have their own civilization, and and they're obviously very advanced. And so I'm like, are they human? Do they age? Is it like actual people? Were they invented or created, or do they have parents? I mean, I have all these questions that, again, I don't know if they'll answer them. I'm sure they won't answer all of them, but it's, I don't know.
I agree completely. I had those exact same questions because like if you exist outside of time and there's literally like infinite realities out there with seemingly infinite forms of life, like why humans? Like and why is like everyone a human? Except we do see one scroll at the beginning. I don't know if you noticed that, but
No.
there's a scroll in like the waiting room when Loki
Okay.
first gets brought in. Which that even makes it more confusing because if it was all humans, it'd be like, okay, it's all humans. But there was one scroll there, so presumably there are other things there. And maybe he was also like not a member of the TVA, but maybe like a prisoner or something. He didn't look like
Yeah.
one, but um, one just I'm pulling this out of nowhere. This has no basis in comics or anything or reality, but I was wondering like maybe they kind of just as these creatures or whatever that do exist out of time and stuff, maybe they just appear to be whatever like the person that's experiencing it is like familiar with. So like because Loki's a humanoid, maybe he sees humanoids or something to that effect. Okay.
That makes sense to me. That's something that I wondered too. But yeah, it's man, it's tough because it's like, again, it's a limited series, and so I know they're not going to address everything, but it just feels like the more I think about the TVA, the more I wonder about it.
Yeah.
And I mean, even things like, why is it so overstaffed? It feels like no one's like, it's like no one's there. It's like it's just Loki and like this other dude, and there's a huge waiting line. And so I guess at some point they needed that waiting line. So was this before they got everything back into order, and now there's not really much of a reason for them to? There's not much need for them, or I don't know. It's like I said, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, it's like my questions lead to more questions.
Yeah, and like when we were walked outside, it was like a vast expanse of buildings and cars or hover cars or whatever. So like it I mean, I guess if there truly is like an infinite amount of realities that all have to be dealt with, I guess you would need a lot of manpower to handle that, but yeah, it is weird that like inside the buildings we saw, there weren't that many people. So,
Yeah, and then what are the people in all these other buildings doing is also
right.
what I wonder. So, because it
Hopefully
doesn't.
we get those answers, but
Well, what do you think episode 2 is going to be about? What's your guess on what's coming next on
mm,
Wednesday?
it's a good question. I mean, I imagine it's kind of just the beginning of Loki probably saying like, yeah, like I'll help even if he doesn't really mean to. It's probably just, at least for now, probably just a means for him to learn more and figure out what he can do here, but I imagine he's like, yeah, okay, let's do this. And then maybe we go on some time adventures with Mobius, like trying to trace the steps of this other Loki and, see the insights that our Loki can give and et cetera, et cetera. At least that's my idea. Plus, like, some things from the trailers, we've clearly seen Loki, which it may not be our Loki, especially with knowing that there are various Lokis out there now. But like in random situations, like there's the one with seems like he has like vote for Loki on his shoulder or whatever. We see him in the ruins of New York, which really excited to see what's going on there. It almost looks as if like what happened should if Loki have won in Avengers 1. So
Mhm.
random guess, but you can see like Stark Tower in the background and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I imagine it's just kind of, especially since it's only up 2, just kind of starting to tread that path of using Loki as the investigative tool and just kind of learning more
Where
about what's going on.
where do you think this goes long term for Loki? Because like Owen or Mobius already says, "Hey, I can't offer you." Basically says you can't go back to your timeline, or I think
Right.
Loki says, "I can't go back to my timeline, can I?" And he said he doesn't directly answer that, but he says like, "I can't offer you." I can't think of the word. It's not my redemption, but it's something along those lines.
Yeah.
But he basically says, "But if you help, this would just be good for all of us." Where do you think this eventually goes for Loki? I mean, it would seem obviously, Marvel they like sort of tidy endings, and so I don't think it ends with Loki getting reset. Like, hey, you did it, thanks, but oh yeah, you really can't, be here.
Right.
So like, I mean, does he end up working for the TVA, kind of like, Catch Me If You Can, like Leonardo DiCaprio's character, or
That'd be cool.
I mean, where does this go for Loki long term?
It's a good question. And kind of on that note, if you didn't know this, they have confirmed that there will at least be a season 2 of this, which that has not been the case for WandaVision or Falcon. Um, but so they definitely have a longer term plan for this, which is interesting. Um, it might have nothing to do with the TVA come season 2, but at least like there are plans for Loki as a character, which I guess especially if there's infinite number of them, it could be anything, right? Um, but I think that long term for the show, I think that there is some sort of corruption, for lack of a better word, or just something else kind of going on with the TVA that, Loki is the type of person that, cares about numero uno first and foremost. So, while he's going to be helping Mobius and the TVA, it's really just going to be for his own
Mhm.
ends, right? So I think that while he's doing that, he'll also have like another kind of side mission, as it were, of like figuring out how he can get out of here, how he can get on top, and yada yada yada. Which I think would actually be interesting is that to see him interact with not only murder Loki but like lots of other Lokis. Because if it really is uh Loki that is the murderer, which I'm sure it is, but like the fact that they still like obscured the face
Yeah,
kind of
why
makes it,
obscure him still?
yeah, like
Right,
maybe there's
right.
some sort of reveal there. But um I would love to see like it's still him. Like it's still Loki. So maybe murder Loki like sheds light to our Loki, and he's like, oh yeah, you're right. Like I'm joining you. And so I don't know. I think that also to your point of uh, what's he gonna do, even if everything does get done and washed nicely and it's all done. I think they would still just delete him because they deleted his whole timeline, so there's nowhere for him to go. Like so he either gets deleted, works for the TVA, or perhaps, and this is kind of like a clean tunnel they've made, perhaps he joins our MCU because our Loki's dead. So there is like a Loki void that he could maybe slip in and just take over for that universe.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it just dawned on me. I was thinking about, not to go back to what we were talking about earlier. When I saw the resetting happen, I was thinking they were like sort of like this Men in Black esque, to the people in the Gobi Desert, like this never happened, and sort of like just removing that moment. But you're right. I mean, as soon as he disappears with the Tesseract, that branching path got totally removed. So sort of like this very casual, like, we'll get rid of that. It does make you wonder if at the end of all of this, they say, okay, hey, great job. And just, you know, press the delete button. I don't know.
Yeah.
But again, Marvel, that doesn't seem like Marvel's style. So I don't know. We'll
I
see.
think that's what the TVA will want to do.
Right.
Like they'll
Yeah.
be like, "All right, well, we're done with you now," because they obviously are pretty cavalier about it. They just delete people. So I don't think that'll happen, obviously. And if it does, that'd be crazy. And I imagine we just start viewing the perspective of a different Loki. But um, yeah, I
Well,
imagine.
let me ask you this though, because it again, Marvel's really into just well crafted stories, and it feels like everything they do is very intentional and well designed. I have a hard time believing we're gonna have like 4 Lokis on screen at any point. It's very like Coming to America esque, where it's like, okay, at what point does this
That's
feel a bit
true.
silly and gimmicky? And we have Loki as Loki, and here's the other Loki, and I just kind of wonder. I feel like they're going to, if there is both in one camera shot, it's going to be either like a final showdown type of deal. But beyond that, I have a hard time believing that they're going to have so much of our boy Tom. I don't know. I mean, I'm willing to be proven wrong. It just feels like the audience, we're so familiar with not that trope, so to speak, but seeing multiples of a character in different forms of culture,
Hmm.
of pop culture. And so I don't know. I part of me wonders if it will get to that, but then I also wonder what Marvel has up their sleeve. Because again, you pointed this out. Mobius told us that it's Loki, and yet why is this person still covered? Why are
Yeah,
they still cloaked up? And I don't know.
yeah. On that, I agree with what you said. Like it could be kind of gimmicky and stuff if they do lean too hard into it. But I do hope we at least get a little bit of it because I just think that would be, small doses don't ruin it. But I think that would be like kind of great content to see like this mischievous, kind of full of himself character interacting with himself.
Almost trying to
Um,
outwit himself when he's
yeah,
already,
yeah.
the genius trickster.
Like I think that would be really interesting. But I 100% agree that like let's too much of it is kind of like,
I
so
guess I did it with Vision. We had
right,
we
right.
had the 2 Visions. Granted, one looked really creepy, but
Where'd he go, by the way?
I
Where is he?
don't know. That's for another podcast episode. I don't
Yeah.
know.
But I will say, kind of on this subject, that, and again, this isn't anything I know. This is just speculation I've seen. So, not a spoiler, hopefully. Maybe it turns out to be true. But are you familiar with the shot from the trailer where it shows like Loki sitting on a rock with a red haired woman? And a lot of people have thought, like, oh, is that Black Widow from Vormir? Like, do you know what I'm talking about? That shot?
No, I haven't done a shot by shot deep dive on the trailer. There's certain parts of it, which the trailer, by the way, was gorgeous. I mean, it was, and by the way, the first episode was also gorgeous. I
Hmm.
think what's clear from the start of the first episode is the amount of investment they've made in creating this beautiful show. The world building is really awesome. The music is really great. But no, I haven't gone through the trailer and seen that specific scene. Although I've seen several others that look really good for what's to come. That I don't want to mention here in case and ends up happening. I don't want to spoil anything.
Hey, bro,
Um,
that's what we're here for, though. You gotta get your predictions in so you can gloat later.
well, then I'll go ahead and say there is a scene from the trailer where it appears that they are on at a crime scene of where evil Loki has killed some dudes,
Mm-hmm.
and that our Loki, somehow outwits them and escapes from them. Like travels through the translucent door,
Mm.
and you see Mobius sort of like, reaching out to try to catch him or stop him. Um, whether that happens sooner than later, I'm not sure. But getting back to your scene,
Oh
tell me
yeah.
more about this, because I haven't seen this before.
So it's just a quick shot from behind, so you're only looking at like the back of their heads. And it's like Loki, presumably our Loki, but who knows, sitting next to a red-haired woman, and like there's space is like the backdrop. So a lot of people have said like, oh, I wonder if that's Black Widow, like either it's sometime around when she got the Soul Stone. Um, but I don't think that's the case, and there's another group of people that think that that is Lady Loki, which is just one of the versions of him in the multiverse is female. I mean, probably a lot more than one, but
Kind of like Miles as Spider-Man.
right, correct. Like just a different iteration of the
Yeah,
character.
I'm
Like
with you.
it's still Loki, but in this
Right.
universe, it's
Or how
female.
Gwen becomes Spider-Man in one of the timelines. Okay, yeah, this makes sense.
Exactly.
Interesting.
So, because of that, perhaps the evil murderous Loki is female Loki. So maybe that's why it's obscured still to kind of maybe have the reveal that like it's a woman. Um, just a possibility.
But in I think the French chapel, they refer to it as a he,
Oh,
though. I
yeah, you might be
think I'd have
right.
to double check it. But you do make me wonder now if, going back to the gimmick of like, our boy Tom, and like there's like three of him on scene, maybe the evil Loki isn't even the same actor. And it's like,
Right,
but it is
yeah.
that version of
Very good point.
so it is still Loki, but it's in the multiverse, it's this version of Loki, and it's Tom Hanks, or I
That would be
don't know.
amazing. I,
Or it's John Cena, or I don't know. I'm Loki. Yeah.
uh
So
the I speaking on all of this, it wasn't the maybe it was the same cartoon, but when they did the cartoon that explained like the origin of the TVA, I don't know if this was part of it or if it was another cartoon. I think there was only one. I'm getting in the weeds. The point is it showed like a guy, like a little stick figure, and he was like walking on the timeline. It was basically just like showing the branch timelines and stuff. Well, it showed that guy as like five different people. So I think that was just kind of showing the fact that like in different realities, maybe you don't look the same, or there's, like in one of them he was big buff, one of them he was like wearing a suit, and there was a constant through all of them, which was like his tie. What it is like is a symbol, but it was like a tie, and then like when he's the buff guy, that symbol is his tattoo, and
hmm,
then I don't remember the rest of them, but there was always like a constant. So I think it was just showing that like these characters, there can be many versions of them. It's the same character, but it may, have
there's always a
different.
lighthouse.
There's always a city. There's
Yeah.
always a man.
And so maybe Loki always has the daggers. I don't know, because we
Yeah,
know that the French in the French chapel, they were killed by daggers, which I thought that was like the biggest clue that this is Loki.
yeah,
That's interesting. I didn't realize that. I will say, going back to that character, I can't remember if it was in the commercial or afterwards. They say that like something as simple as being late to work could create a branching path, which is a bit terrifying, that you could get deleted for
yeah,
you missed work. So see ya, you ruined the timeline.
for real. It's yeah. I mean, again, I just want to see who is choosing what's this correct timeline. I guess it's the timekeepers, and like why. And like you said, if that is what's going on, it's probably for some self-serving moment, right? But hopefully we get answers to all these things. I
Well,
go ahead.
I was gonna say we'll find out in 6
Yeah,
days.
true. I did have a couple like random questions for you as we're wrapping up here that I didn't want to forget. Let me just look. Um oh yeah, well one, what do you think happens to a robot that comes to the TVA after they were like, were you born an organic life form, or
Yeah, that was such a great scene, and it's a perfect example of how Marvel is able to deliver comedic content that doesn't detract from like the tone of the show. It's one of the scenes we actually went back and watched again because we just
Oh,
thought it was
nice.
hilarious. Part of me wonders. So the first time I watched it, I thought, okay, if a robot comes here, then it's like this isn't compatible. You can't be a robot and I guess make it through here in some ways. The my second watch through, the take I got from the scene was more that if you're a robot, you simply can't step through this device,
Mm-hmm.
implying that there is another way that you get processed through to your
Interesting.
to be before the judge. Because the person says, "Well, what if I was a robot? Well, then this machine would melt you from the inside out."
Right.
And it kind of makes me think of like when you go through security at like an airport terminal. You know, if you have metal on you, it's like not like people with metal can't come to the airport. It's like, well, then we need to do a different way to make sure that you're safe or what have you. And so my second watch through, that's the take that I got from it. And so I did start with this place is anti-robot, and then ended with okay, it's just you just can't be a robot and go through that particular device, which, like I said, was a great scene.
And wasn't the device, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it was almost like the printout was like of his soul?
It said he said your temporal something,
Hmm.
and the guy's like, my what? And then it just moves on from there. So
Which
yeah, but it was something like that. Yeah.
which obviously that was a hilarious and great scene, but also with Marvel, it's like usually stuff like that isn't just a throwaway joke somebody came up with, like, and maybe we don't even ever get addressed, but part of me thinks like there's a reason for that. Like, why don't they want robots in here? Or maybe it's not even that they don't, but like, why can they not? Or I don't really have an answer here. I'm
It's
just
one of those things where I really appreciate the knowledge of like the comic book readers
mm,
because they have such a vast knowledge of like of it being like well actually in the comic books, you know, and not to get back to Mephisto, but you know, here's why Mephisto is so important. This is actually what happens in the comic books, and this is why you know this moment is so vital, even though it seemed kind of nonchalant. This is actually tying us into a bigger moment. Or people who say like, you know, oh, that's just a nod to the comics. It's not
right.
really anything that important. It's just you can tell that the writers really appreciate the comments and they're saying, hey, comic book readers, we notice you and we really appreciate you know things like that. It's an Easter egg, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so this is one of those moments where I haven't dug too in the weeds on how the TVA is represented in the comics, but I would be curious if there's a comic book reader out there who's maybe listening right now who has their own take on, based on what they know about the TVA, exactly your question. What's the deal with, you know, no robots or they can't go through that or what's going on there? And even like this temporal, you know, image. Because I have no idea.
Yeah. And on that note, like you just said, if we do have anybody that's hanging out listening right now, please hit with all your theories and ideas in the comments because we both eat that up. That's why we're doing this because we like that type of stuff. So I would love to hear it, and I know Blake would as well. Um, okay, but I got a couple other things here that I just wanted to get your take on. Well, this isn't really a question, but I just thought it was funny that and I didn't know this. I just kind of saw the commentary of it. But when Mobius and Loki are in the film room when he's showing him the film, he's drinking a drink called Josta, which is like a drink that
Okay.
doesn't exist anymore. Like it was like canceled or discontinued or whatever. I think it was from the 90s. And what's funny is in one of the trailers, it also shows Owen Wilson drinking Boku juice, which is similarly does not exist anymore. So I just thought that was kind of like like a funny little like I don't know like sprinkle to put on this show to show that like yeah these people that exist outside of time, if they like something, it doesn't matter if it doesn't exist anymore. They can just go get it from any time or dimension they want. And I just thought that was
Or,
that was a cool little thing to add with, especially
or,
without.
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just saying the other thing I thought about because I was thinking about Mobius and I was like, was he does he create it here? And is it like you said, where it's like, oh, I really like that from that timeline, and they kind of you know pick and choose like little tokens and trinkets and like foods and things that they like, or and here's just a random thought:
Hit me.
was Mobius living on Earth, and in the '90s, like that was his drink, and he
Oh,
was recruited to come work for the TVA,
that's
and he maybe
interesting.
he was like a bombshell detective, and he gets recruited, and it's like you're gonna live forever now. You're gonna move to this place where you don't age anymore, and like time doesn't exist, but it's for the good of all humanity. And he makes this decision to do it, but he likes, still likes
Like,
his
I'm
Josta.
not doing it unless I get my Josta.
I don't know. It's just things that I wonder.
No,
I don't
I
know.
really like that idea. That's cool. Plus, it would kind of answer some of the stuff we were talking about earlier of like, why humans? And,
Hmm.
that would be super interesting.
And then we can get our Mobius origin movie,
That's right.
down the road.
That's
So
right. I hope that Owen Wilson's here to stay, like, at
yep.
least for the whole season. Like, I'm hoping he doesn't die in a couple episodes, but if there is a season 2, which I think there is, like, I would love if he's still around for that. Um, side note, the MCU is just the best casting. With
Oh yeah.
the casting director for the MCU's name is Sarah Finn, so I've
Mhm.
always thought that was funny. So just shout
Actually,
out,
I looked her up on Facebook to be like, is she working for Marvel? just
bro.
just just
How
curious. And
crazy would that be? I'd be like,
she
yo, just
wasn't.
let me get a walk-on extra role, please.
So we have a high school friend named Sarah Finn. So every time that casting line or production line comes up on the end of shows, I always think like, is this our high school friend Sarah Finn? But it's not.
She
So
made it. If so, yeah, she's actually a
yeah,
vet, so an equally honorable profession she has,
sure.
just not as cool.
But she can't get a sweet, walk on
Yeah.
like this other Sarah
Oh
Finn
yeah, she
can.
honestly has kind of failed. She needs to
Yeah.
get her life together.
So
But no,
we just leave it at
I,
that.
I
It's
really
like, all
like
right, well,
your theory there. I think that would be super cool if that was the case.
yeah.
Oh yeah, this is a question for you. So we got the little tidbit with Loki as DB Cooper, which I thought was great. With the heist and the money in the plane. Are you familiar with DB Cooper?
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. I was waiting for the question.
Oh.
My blank stare was, I guess I
I didn't
blacked
know.
out during that
I didn't
scene.
know if you knew where I was coming from.
I didn't know what was happening until he jumped out of the plane and the person was like, "Oh, you were DB Cooper or whatever it was."
Yeah.
Mobius says, "DB Cooper, that's amazing." But I wasn't putting it together until that happened.
So we kind of got a shot of that in the trailer.
Right.
And so before watching episode 1, I was like, "Oh dang, they're going to get into so much crazy stuff." And I thought that Loki, like, while being with the TVA, was going to like pull the DB Cooper heist. But so now we just find out that he just did it in his normal lifespan, which is interesting and great, but I still am hoping that we get some like DB Cooper-esque hijinks that maybe explain some of our real world like myths and urban legends. Be like, oh, it was Loki and that type of thing. But my question for you was, he said it was because of a bet with Thor. And so I know there's no way you could possibly know, but what do you think the bet was?
Funny you ask because I do know what it was for. No, I'm just kidding. No, I mean, it's funny. I think what I've always loved about Thor and Loki is like this brotherly prankster, like back and forth that happens. So who knows what it was, but it's cool how I do like how they are taking these modern events we know of and tying it back to, well, that was Loki all along.
Mm-hmm.
And it is interesting to think about what else would they possibly do if they'll devote any more screen time to it. But I don't know. I'm sure it had something to do with like, Thor's brawn versus, Loki's mischievousness, and Thor won out, I guess. I guess he outsmarted Loki for once. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I like that too, that like they made some sort of, I imagine it was just some sort of like stupid bet, and then whatever that was, Loki lost, and because of that, Thor was like, go rob a bank or something. But it's interesting that they had Heimdall in on it, at least to an extent, that he had to like distract him. So I just liked to kind of get a picture of their relationship, which, I mean, they're both thousands of years old, so obviously they've probably had lots of moments like that. But from what we'd seen in the movies pre Ragnarok, like before Loki kind of comes around to being more of a good guy per se, you just assume they kind of like butted heads their entire lives. But this showed that,
Right.
They still had fun brotherly
Some
hijinks.
camaraderie.
Yeah. So I liked that. And
then I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Just as we're wrapping up. Obviously Mobius is trying to get into Loki's head, trying to sort of convince him that, hey, you need us in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciated his like first prodding questions of like, who are you, and like, what's your glorious purpose? And he's like, well, I'm destined to be the king of Midgard. And he's like, wow, it seems like you're really good at losing. And he's just like, he's just trashing this guy.
Yeah.
Is glorious purpose, is that from a previous movie? Is that from the comic books? Because I haven't seen Thor in forever. And then I think our listeners will forgive me, because I think many of us never saw Dark World. And so I'm like, where was this from? What was the glorious purpose that he keeps mentioning? Because we see by the end of this episode that he's pretty much totally shirked that thinking entirely, and he's almost to the point where like this was ridiculous to believe in
Yeah.
ever.
Well, he's always kind of had, always, at least from what we've seen, kind of the inferiority complex of living in the shadow of his literal god brother and literal godfather. And I think I think it was in Avengers that he said it, but he said, "I am burdened with glorious purpose," meaning like it's his life's work and like just the burden that has fallen upon him to subjugate and rule like these inferior beings. Like it's a shitty job, but somebody's got to do it, and it's me. Like that's my glorious purpose. So I think
Hmm.
that was the callback with the episode title here, and just kind of explains why he has those aspirations and was doing what he was doing in Avengers 1, which is where we pick up with him this show.
Cool. No,
Yeah.
that makes sense, and I guess it makes also sense. How easily manipulated he was by Thanos. Maybe even manipulated isn't the right word. I mean, he kind of knew what he was doing, but Thanos especially is clued into that. I'm sure he probably promised him, yeah, you'll be the ruler. It'll be yours.
Yeah,
So,
which I'm sure Loki thought that, like, they probably both thought they were getting one over on the other, right? Like Loki probably was like, yeah, give me the mind stone and the staff and I'll go use it to subjugate Earth. But really he's like, then I'm just gonna screw you, Thanos. But
mhm.
I thought that was a really like cool moment to see, because I'm sure that is what he thought, and then yet he gets to witness Thanos rob him of his life. So he's probably like, oh, like dang, I wasn't able to outsmart him, or wasn't able to come out on top. I mean, it's just got to be weird to watch your own death.
And I think our boy Tom did a great job of acting that scene out, because you can see the shock and horror in his eyes of seeing this happen. And I liked the scene too, because right after this happens, it says end of file. And Loki's so good at faking his own death, and you think he's dead, but he pops up somewhere else. And so there was a
Mhm.
lot of fan theory around, did Thanos really kill him?
Right.
They're going to bring him back. And so it seems like this episode confirmed that he really did die, and that was the end of his life.
Yeah. And what's interesting, which now that we've seen episode 1, it kind of makes it less likely, but going into the show, I had the idea that so the Loki that Thanos kills, one of the last things he says is like, "Don't worry, brother, the sun will shine on us again." So to me, I was like, what if our Loki from the TV show is that Loki, and that is just like the last moment of his life chronologically, but like so he does die there, and that's the final moment of his life, but he might have hundreds of years still to live, like through these time hijinks. Just ultimately, he ends up in that moment, and he just knows because I still know about all my TVA adventures in the hundreds of years, and I eventually do meet up with my brother again. That like in Thor's timeline, he and Loki will still have moments together after Thanos kills him. It's just for Loki, that's his end,
Mhm.
if
It's
that
kind
makes
of like
sense.
when Steve Rogers sees his love of his life on her deathbed, but it's not their
Right,
final scene together. We know that later he will go back to
right.
see her again.
Exactly. It's a
Um,
good analogy.
yeah, that's interesting. I like that. I like that theory. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah. So, like I said, that was before I saw the episode, so it seems a little different now because clearly this Loki was from another timeline. So it would have to be that it always was, which is kind of confusing, which I don't know if that
Mhm.
works anymore. But I just thought that would be like a really cool like narrative choice, is that like he said that line, "The sun will shine on us again," because he knew it would. Like he knew that for Thor, they still had time together. But I don't know. Two final things. Sorry. One, just got to shout it out. I forgot to earlier. When he's watching the film that Mobius is sharing with them, my girl, my girl Ashley Johnson makes a cameo because she was in Avengers 1. If you remember, she's like a waitress that's just she has like 2 seconds of screen time during like the attack on New York. And apparently there was like a longer story there that just got cut. So I just thought it was crazy that she showed up again. It was just again just a split second when he was like reviewing his
Yeah,
old memories.
I don't think I even knew who she was whenever I saw Avengers, but that's
I didn't
awesome.
either. I didn't
Good for
either
her
back
though.
then.
That was the
Yeah.
beginning, I'm sure, for
So it
her.
made me wonder, like, with such little things they showed there, like that's kind of a weird thing to show. So I wonder if there will somehow be any type of like revisiting of that moment. And then
They bring in Ashley Johnson as like a next superhero from that
right,
moment.
the
That'd be cool.
waitress.
Yeah.
And then the final thing, which isn't, I didn't notice this. This is just something I saw, so I'm taking zero credit for it. But did you see the speculation that Peggy Carter was in the TVA?
No, what?
So there was it's right after he steals the little device from Mobius and kind of makes his initial escape, and he's in a hallway. And then in the backdrop of that hallway, one of those portal doors open, and a member of the TVA like escorts somebody through, and it's blurry and it's in the background, so you can't really see it very well, but she has like it looks like Peggy Carter. She's got like the same silhouette, same hair. So a lot of people have been like, "Is that her?" Like maybe she got abducted because of what her and Cap did to the timeline, which I mean, I don't think it is, but that's still just like a fun little thing. That it would be crazy if it was her.
It would be crazy, but it would only serve to reinforce my theory on Mobius having lived a life somewhere and being recruited to work
Oh
for the
yeah,
TVA.
that maybe she was being recruited. That would
Yeah,
be
I don't
super
know.
interesting.
So
But yeah, I just wanted to share that in case you hadn't seen it. Um, I think that's all I got basically. Unless you
that's all
got
I got
anything
too,
else.
man. No, I mean, this has been fun. And, I can't stress enough how much I enjoyed the first episode. And I thought every part of it was awesome. And I'm really excited for the next one.
Well, what do you think about Loki though?
Oh, like the character, or what do you mean? Oh, the episode.
I was just pretending you were talking about this.
I was totally thrown. I was like, what did I just say? So this was also really fun. Big shout out to my co-host for being such a great
Well,
co-host.
big shout out to mine too.
Your beard is good.
And we are the Pixelists, and we will figure out more about what that means in the future.
This
But
timeline.
exactly, there's other timelines where we talk about stuff that is not allowed to be uttered on American internet. So just
Sounds like it's illegal or something then.
uh,
Still kosher
yeah,
though. It's
yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, the plan is to do one of these for every episode, so we will hopefully, see you again. If you somehow made it this far, just like, drop us a comment or whatever they say to do on YouTube and stuff.
On the YouTubes.
Yeah. Well, all
Yeah.
right. Well, I guess that's it for today.
Peace.
All right. Peace out, everybody.